Joy and Johan will take us down memory lane for those of you that were lucky enough to be on these trips with Joy and Johan. And they will present the first 4 of the international trips that were arranged through the club. So the destinations they will speak about are Madagascar, Ethiopia, Ghana, and Ecuador, some incredible destinations. I've only been fortunate enough to have gone to Ethiopia, and I'm desperate to go to the other 3. So I look forward to hearing what they have to say about them. So just before I hand over to Joy as she shares her screen, I'm going to be watching the chat room, and I will collate questions. I think it'll be easier just to do the questions all at the end. So if you have any questions, pop them into the chat room. I'll keep track of that. And then I will manage those questions at the end. So without any more talk from me, I'm very excited to hand over to Joy and Johan. We look forward to your talk, guys. Thanks for doing it.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Now, I have to share a screen, I believe. Good. Can everybody see that? It should be our first slide showing you the title, Around the World in 80 Days. And yeah, why that title? Well, we visited 8 different countries and at least 10 days birding in each. But I was a bit ambitious, thinking we could get through all 8 in 1 hour. So we've divided it into 2 parts. And tonight we're just handling, as Mike said, the first 4. There we are. In slightly younger days, that was in fact a decade ago, in the high Andes of Ecuador. I thought I'd share with you this little poem that I found on Facebook the other day. The reason I know my youth has been spent is my get up and go has got up and went. But I really don't mind, as I think with a grin of all the fun places my get up has been. And that has definitely been true of all our travels, especially in the last decade and a bit, when we arranged all these wonderful birding tours, as well as other tours. So here's a world map, just to show you. Tonight we're going to touch on Madagascar, which of course is this big island of Africa. Then up to Ethiopia, near the Horn of Africa. And then across the Atlantic to Ecuador, which is just here above Peru. And then finally to Ghana in the west of Africa. And in September, we'll do Thailand, Sri Lanka, Costa Rica, and Uganda. So those are the 8 countries. This is the group that went to Madagascar in 2008. It was the club's 70th anniversary, and Ian kindly offered to lead a couple of tours. And one of them was to Madagascar, and we were very lucky to be in that group. We flew to Antananarivo, which is the capital of Madagascar, and we stayed in this hotel in the center. You'll see Ian down here talking to one of the locals. And I'll never forget, over breakfast on the first morning, an excited Vernon saying, wow, he'd just seen 3 lifers from his bed while he was looking out the window. And that's the really nice thing about going to new places, is that just about every bird you see is in fact a lifer. Madagascar has other specials besides its birds, and the first place we went, in fact, called Barenti, they had all these wonderful lemurs. Up here you'll see the ring-tailed lemur, the brown lemur, and this guy here is called Varose Faka. But the lemurs ranged in size, tiny little things that fit in your palm of your hand, right up to fairly large lemurs. Now we're going to focus not on everything we did, because we definitely can't cover everything we did. So we're going to focus on a few birding outings which were fun and where we saw some special birds. And one of these was when we were in Tulia, which is on the west coast, southwest of Madagascar. And we traveled by bus to this point where we had to now get on a boat, which was anchored out here. And from the shore to the boat, we were to travel in these ox carts. What were the zebu carts? And so what's a fun way to start a birding day? Then when we got to the boat, it was all aboard, and we set off for a couple of islands. If you recognize people along the way, of course, that's Sandy, and behind her is Ian. Otto and Johan were the main photographers, I think, on this tour. And of course, this is an island where we had arrived, and it was a photographer's paradise. Under every little bush, just about, there was a red-tailed tropic bird. And here's one of the chicks. It's very fortunate that the locals leave this island alone, and they don't eat the tropic birds, because they believe that the spirits protect them. They are in flight, very graceful. Okay, and there is our friend that we're thinking of tonight. But that's a very good after action satisfaction shot as Mel takes a snooze on the way back to land. This is where Johan takes over.
Right, so from Tulia, we traveled a short distance to a little resort village called Ifati, 25 kilometers, but the road was so bad, it took us 3 hours to reach there. And we stayed at the Nautilus Hotel. And I think a good omen was to see the Madagascar button quail happily roaming around in the gardens of the hotel. Not normally a sort of a bird that is so accommodating. The reason we'd come here was to visit the spiny forest. The spiny forest is located in a very arid region with low erratic winter rainfall. And of course, the trees and the thickets and so on have adapted. We had to get up very early so we could be there before the sun came up. And from a photography point of view, you had to adjust your cameras to the very low light to start with. And apart from all the spiny trees, Madagascar has 6 of the world's 9 baobab species. So it's an absolute delight for people who love baobabs. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. And even if you weren't into birding, I mean, this would be a fantastic destination to visit. An incredibly special forest. As a group appreciating just some of the trees around. And this is another way of accommodating the arid regions. But of course, we were there from a birding point of view, and this was one of the local guides that played a very useful role because they knew the area, and they would locate the birds, and we would run around to find them. This is a picture that you get when you have a bird in amongst the thickets, moving quite fast in poor light. A very, very special bird. So we had to borrow a photograph from the internet just to give you an impression as to what a wonderful bird it is. Very fortunate to get some really good views of this. This bird, according to the literature, you'll find on the ground. We just happened to come across an illiterate bird, up in a tree. It's a family of its own, consisting of 2 species. This banded kestrel was totally unperturbed by us and sat on this thorny spike for a long time, giving us all really lovely views. The main birds we were looking for in this area are the koas. There are 10 species in Madagascar, and 6 of them you find in the dry land, and then 4 in the forest areas. So one of the first ones we came across is a red-capped koa. It's quite a big bird and really colorful. And the names often make a lot of sense, obviously why it's a red cap. And then we have the crested koa with that beautiful purple and blue patches around the eye. Just another shot of it. Running koa sitting still in this particular photo. And the biggest of them, of course, being the giant koa. And to round it off, we saw the green-capped koa as well. And not in the lowlands, but just to complete the koa picture, this was one of the forest koas we saw, the blue koa, a lovely deep blue color with that blue eye patch. And after such a fantastic day, it was appropriate to celebrate with crayfish. This is Dennis, tucking in and enjoying the meal. Madagascar is very endemic rich, not only in species, but in bird families, and a very well-known family of birds endemic to Madagascar are the vangas. So, I thought we should show you just some of the vangas. The red-shouldered vanga found down in the arid southwest, and then further north, Schlebusch vanga, with a clearly, striking eye. The sickle-billed vanga, well-equipped to get into those cracks and crevices. And white-headed vanga, just a few of the many vanga species found in Madagascar. Right, I'm handing back to Joy now as we leave Madagascar.
So that trip really whetted our appetite. And after that, a couple of the guys that were on that trip, Otto, Johan, Vernon, got together and decided to plan other trips. And so the first of those was, in fact, then to Ethiopia, which is up here. This is the closest I've got to a group photo, but here you'll see 2 guys that we met at one of our hotels. They were cycling from Cairo to Cape Town, and they had spent a couple of days at the hotel because they'd been laid low by diarrhea, a bad bout of diarrhea. And there we are to see them off on their journeys. Ethiopia is quite special for a number of reasons, but one of the specialities is the food. It's quite different. Injera is the national dish, and this, as you'll see on this plate of rolled injera, it looks like pancakes, but it in fact a sour fermented flatbread bread, that's quite an acquired taste. And personally, I never got really into it, but you can see that you select various condiments to go with it, and then you put it all on your, it's like a pancake. You don't roll it up though, you eat it like that. Here's John and Marge. They actually really got into eating this. They enjoyed it. Now, we traveled around Ethiopia in 5 of these 4x4s. One of the first places we thought we'd show you is the Bale Mountain National Park. It's very high and very cold. We had to really layer up that day. heron on the top. This is like a plateau. And our target creature wasn't a bird, this Abyssinian wolf. We were lucky enough to see a trio of these beautiful animals. And then a few birds. This is the spot-breasted lapwing, blue-winged goose, Roger's rail. And then down off the plateau, our guides had arranged with the chief of this little village for us to visit. And you can see the whole village, in fact, came out to look at us while we were looking up in the trees. This was our target bird, Prince Raspoli's Turaco. We had really lovely sightings of that bird. And that night we came to a town further south. We stayed in this hotel. Doesn't look too bad actually from the outside, but you see this area at the back here. These are the toilets. We all had to share these toilets together with the occupants of the local pub. So that wasn't too exciting. We had a wonderful evening. We had, if I remember, spaghetti bolognese, which had been cooked by our drivers. And then we spent the night there. The next morning, this is the reason we had come to this territory, which was the Libyan Plains. The next morning we set out at dusk, and we spread out over this. It's really a giant field, and our target was to try and find the Libyan lark, which is a critically endangered lark. And it is critically endangered because of the high pressure grazing on its habitat. And you can see even while we were there, sorry, let me just go back. There was a drought. The cattle looked as if they were all starving. And you can see there's very little left on these plains. We did get to see the Libyan lark, and there it is. And this, I'm afraid to say, is a picture we had to download from the internet because we did not get a good picture ourselves. And for me, one of the specialities of this day, it's really a wonderful memory. It's this little trio of children that came and gave us a little song and dance routine while we were birding. And just look at the face of this little girl. Isn't she beautiful? Over to Johan.
So I think Mike alluded to the fact that he'd been to Ethiopia. It's really a great destination for birders. On the whole, I think the locals don't, catch and eat the birds. So the birds are often very accommodating, very approachable. And it was great to see some of the families we recognize, but different species. So this is the rosy-patched bushshrike. The double-toothed barbet, so named obviously because of the beak, the striking barbet. This very, ground thrush, the Abyssinian ground thrush, posed very, very nicely for us. And of course, the hornbills are always a special treat. The Abyssinian ground hornbill, you'll notice, has got the blue patches around the eye, and it's slightly smaller than the southern groundbill that we are familiar with. So apart from the Prince Raspoli's Turaco, this was another absolutely key bird for us, the Stresemann's bush crow. It's very regional specific. but you know, it doesn't really seem to fit in the crow family, but there you have it. Streseman's bush crow, a very attractive bird with, once again, a striking blue eye. And I think most of us probably know the red-throated wryneck, but it gave us such good sightings that felt we just had to include that as well, just to give you an idea of the variety. Now, this is at Lake Awassa, and we arrived there, and I must say I was not particularly hopeful that you know, this was a good place to go birding with all the activity on the jetty. But it was absolutely amazing, the number of birds, ducks, you know, waders, you know, etc., which were around. And I mean, this is just to give you an idea. From here, we were photographing the birds in here, kingfishers, whiteback ducks, and so on. I sometimes had to step back because the birds were so close that I couldn't focus. And this is just to give you a really good example. This pygmy goose was swimming around happily a couple of meters away from all of this activity. And as most of you will know, this is normally quite a difficult bird to see and photograph. And there it was, virtually in our laps. I'm particularly fond of you know, the baboons, etc. These to me were quite special. The grinning Galada or bleeding heart baboon up at the top, and the one of fancy hairstyle, the Hamadreus baboon, down at the bottom, just to introduce them to you. And now it's back to Joy.
Just a few people shots. This is Marge with some of the locals. They were really fascinated by us and what we were doing. And here she's explaining. Here's Simon showing children birds through his scope. One of the places we visited, we were accompanied by a man with a gun. I'm not quite sure whether that's AK-47, but anyway, it was a fairly old-looking gun. But that man eventually was carrying our scope as well by the end of the day. Then in the south, the women wear these beautiful colored cloths. And this is one of my favorite photos. I've had it as a screensaver. Okay, that's the end of Ethiopia. And now we're moving on to Ecuador, which is over here. Here's the group. This is in the high Andes. That's the group photo. This was one of the first of 4 trips we have done with tropical birding. This is Sam Woods from Tropical Birding, and he has been our guide on 4 trips. But in Ecuador, he was assisted by Jose. And of course, this is Stella, who you'll know. We traveled in Ecuador in a rather comfortable bus. And this is just an hour out of Quito, where we went for a walk along a contour path in a nature reserve. And at the end of that contour path were all these nectar feeders. And it was just so delightful. There were hummingbirds all over the place. You can see how close they come as well. They just ignore you. You didn't even need a large camera at all to take pictures there. We saw one of the most spectacular hummingbirds there, the sword-billed hummingbird. And this bird, of all birds in the world, has a bill that is longer than its body. And of course, one of the downsides of such a long bill is that they can't preen themselves with this bill, and they have to use their feet for preening. And the hummingbirds all seem to have these wonderful names, like this is a golden-breasted puffleg. You can see the little white, almost booties around its legs. Andean emerald, wing star frontlet. Okay, so they are special. The same walk, we saw 2 antpitters. They're very special birds as well, very shy. The rufous antpitter. There's another shot of the rufous. And this one is the tawny antpitter. So very special birds. Our destination was the Tandayapa Lodge, and we stayed there for 4 nights. It was just superb. You'll see here that we had wonderful food, but even from the dining room table, people were birding. You can see Vernon's obviously just seen a lifer because he's writing it in his book. This was our accommodation, fairly basic, but very comfortable. Every night we sat in the lounge. Here's Sam going through the bird list. We'd tick off the birds that we had seen that day. That's the view from the Tandayapa Lodge. Over to Johan.
So it's quite possible to stay at the Tandayapa Lodge and not go anywhere just because there's so many birds, and in particular the hummingbirds. This is the purple-throated woodstar. And of course, the hummingbirds are able to hover in one place. So you don't see the wings here because the woodstar wings beat it up to 80 times a second, quite incredible. So it looks like it's standing still in the air. Spotted inca and hummingbirds, because of this ability to hover, feed from below. So a lot of the flowers point downwards, whereas in South Africa, sunbirds typically feed from the top. This long-tailed sylph we saw further north, but once again, just a very beautiful bird. And as Joy says, the names themselves are also striking. Forest birding, so we were in the cloud forest, the first part of it, is often difficult, you know, with sore necks at the end of the day. And in the cloud forest, you will get the rainy days and you need to be appropriately prepared for it. It can get quite chilly. And for the macro enthusiasts, Andrew is a good example of how to get close up and comfortable. Andrew was our macro specialist on the trip. And from Tandayapa, going back towards Quito, we stopped off at this farmer's place. Now, this farmer was quite unique because what he had found as he was working the farm is that some of the antpitters were becoming used to him. And then he would start feeding them, you know, and they became very familiar. And he decided eventually to expand and to include birding as part of the offerings from the farm to increase his income and his livelihood. And you know, he had a very special relationship with the birds and given them all names. So we set off once again very early so we could be at our destination before the sun came up, to wait for the antpitters that this farmer had habituated. And the first of them was Maria, the giant antpitter. Now the antpitters, as Joy said earlier, normally very shy, difficult to see. So when you get such a you know, incredible view, you know, and great photographs, it really is very special. You know, lovely chest barring. Dark wood quail was another bird that we saw in amongst the the undergrowth. And then we had an exercise in patience. We heard a bird calling, must have been at least a kilometer away. And I don't think any of us thought that we were going to see this bird at all. And we sat around patiently for more than half an hour whilst he called, the bird called Thomas. And much to our surprise and huge delight, Thomas eventually arrived and oscillated Pakulu. And I think for some of the people, I think Otto in particular, this was really one of the trip birds for him. And it really was very accommodating for us and made that whole wait more than worthwhile. And then off to lunch. Now, when you've got a bunch of birders, lunch will sometimes fade into the background because we are presented with an absolute smorgasbord of birds arriving just outside. There's a blue-winged mountain tanager, golden-rumped euphonia, another euphonia, the orange-crowned euphonia, and another one of the mountain tanagers, a hooded one. And the most attractive of the birds we saw up was undoubtedly the orange-breasted fruit eater. So once again, we're getting all these new bird species and families, which is really great to get to. There's a masked flower piercer. And I think if all LBJs were as attractive as the grass wren was, you would get a lot more LBJ enthusiasts. And yet another new bird species for us was the white-whiskered puffbird. From there, we headed up north to really see one of the target birds, the key target birds for the whole trip. And it was getting late. It was near dusk, and once again, I don't think you'd expect to see much in rapids like this. Yet, we were incredibly lucky to see the torrent duck. Now, unfortunately, my photograph suffered both from a photographer's lack of skills as well as a very poor light. So once again, we had to borrow from the internet just to give you the impression. We saw both the male and the female on the left and the male on the right. And these incredible ducks have no difficulty in navigating these turbulent waters. And at the end of the trip, this was voted as the top bird of the trip for us. On the way back down, we were birding along the road. In particular, in these mountains, we were looking for a very iconic bird, condor. A condor really is a massive bird. It's got a wingspan. This is the Andean Condor, a wingspan of over 3 meters, weighs up to 15 kilograms. So it really dwarfs our lappet-faced vulture. And though we saw them in a distance, we were very happy to be able to have seen the iconic Andean Condor.
So we spent also a few days up in the high Andes. They've got a number of volcanoes. They're inactive at the moment, but you can see they are all covered in snow. And one of the target birds up there, well, first of all, to say we drove up this mountain to a certain spot, and then we had to walk the rest of the way, and the air is so thin and everybody's struggling to breathe. Over 4,000 meters high. These snow-capped ones are well over 5,000 meters high. So our target bird up there, they've got a wonderful camouflage. You can see there the rufous-bellied seed snipe. It's in a family of its own. And they're usually found in pairs like this. Right. And it was up here that we took the group photo, etc. But then off to Quito, we got on a plane, and I think it was just under an hour, and we flew down into the Amazon basin, and the town that we landed at was called Coca, and we got onto one of these long boats, and we took a ride down the Napo River. I forget how long, but I think it was about an hour and a bit down, two hours down the river. And our destination was the Sacha Lodge, which was quite a luxurious lodge for the jungle. So you get off at one point, and then you walk along a boardwalk. I think that was about 500 meters or so. Then get into a smaller boat, number of smaller boats, and you go along this canal. It opens up into this beautiful lake. You go across the lake. This is part of the lodge here. There's the lodge. There's a few shots of the lodge. I know the men often don't like this sort of thing, but I think the women do. So that's the dining room. And that's where we shared some really good meals. The rooms themselves were in the grounds like this. Very comfortable. Even had your own hammock on the balcony, and from your hammock you can look into the jungle itself. It's right there. I was lucky enough to see this little black beauty from my hammock. It's like an overgrown rat, but a bit more attractive with long legs. Birds around and about. These are the Hoatzins. They are also a family of their own, very unusual looking birds. Horny-bellied screech owl. Let's look at that camouflage. And then at night, you could go out and look for other little things, like this very cute little frog. I think this is one of Andrew's photos. And there's another very strange creature, like a grasshopper. And then birding experiences like this, these wonderful quiet backwaters, paddling along, birds calling in the trees around you. Whoops. There's our friend Mel again, and Vernon. Our destination that day was to go up this tower that had been built in the jungle. At the top, you can see out over the canopy and get wonderful views. And you see birds like this, the many-banded aracari. It's a toucan aracari. This one, the ivory-billed aracari. Okay, over to Johan.
So the next day we set off. The main purpose of the day was to visit this clay lick. So what happens when you get to a clay lick is initially there's nothing there to see, because when the parrots do come down to the clay lick, they are very exposed, and it's a huge risk for them. So they sit around on the edges, waiting until eventually one of them is brave enough, and then they come down large numbers. The dominant parrot here, the green with the yellow tail, is the mealy parrot. And the reason that they are prepared to take this risk is that the minerals which they get from the clay lick has a high sodium content, which helps to neutralize some of the toxic food that they consume. And they do come down in big numbers, a whole variety of species at once. Here's the cobalt-winged parrot with that striking blue wing. And the biggest and the most attractive of the parrots we saw was the orange-cheeked parrot. So we had a great morning, you know, sitting there. Sometimes the parrots flew past your head and you had a duck. But along the river, there were also some other special sightings. This ladder-tailed nightjar decided to roost at the side of the river. And this very unusual bird, I must admit, when I first saw it, I didn't know if it was a bird at all. The common putu, I've never seen anything like this before, but actually it's a very striking and attractive bird. Lots of trogons in the jungles and in Ecuador, and there's just a couple of examples: the black-tailed trogon, and one of the endemics, the choco trogon. Large number of woodpecker species, and we just chose the one, which is, you know, this red-headed Quail woodpecker. This is a very large woodpecker, probably about double the size of our woodpeckers. So a very striking and impressive bird to see. And down in the jungle, you still get some of the hummingbirds. This is a straight-billed hermit that we saw down there. And that brings us to the end of our Ecuador adventure.
Okay, so one more country to go, and that is Ghana, which is up here in West Africa. We went to various places in Ghana, you can see on this map, but we're going to focus on two places in particular. Here's a group photo. Here we are in front of a beautiful mosque, and the next slide is a bit of a close-up of the group. So you'll see some of the people have gone on at least 2 or 3 of the trips. We traveled in a bus like this, a very comfortable bus. One place we went to was the Nkasa rainforest. It's right across to the west, in the southwest, near the border with Cote d'Ivoire. It was a very basic camp. These are toilets, which I think had hastily been built a little while before, and up the steps to where the camp was. This was our tent, pretty basic, just a mattress basically on the floor. There's the tent. This little one, if you're a single, such as Dennis, you had quite a rough time. It was very tiny tent. There we are, getting ready for going out. Here's our dining area right next to the forest. And this is what the walks, the birding walks would look like. Again, lots of neck-aches. A few of the birds, the red-billed firefinch, many of us will know that, of course. Shining blue kingfisher. Red-headed malimbi, which Johan's reminding me is related to the weaver family. And this guy is the red-vented malimbi. Bee eaters, they're found often in the forest areas. When you're in a rainforest, well, it rains. So this is a downpour that we experienced. And you can see there our tents are almost being washed away in the river that followed. There was a little stream near our camp, and there was this bridge over the stream. And I was happily standing on the bridge looking out. When I looked up, and there above me was this snake, and I sort of got a shock and moved across. There he is. Thought, well, I'll get to safety. I'll go to the other side. Blow me down. I looked up, and there was another snake on that side of the bridge. So not such a good place to spend any time. I put these people shots in because I thought they were so excellent. There's 3 little girls coming back from school, and they come across this group of strangers doing strange things too. You can just see the look on their faces. You can imagine the elders saying to the younger ones, "Hold on to me, guys." And then they got through our crowd. One of the sad things about Africa, wherever we've been in Africa, we've seen when you're in the forest, you see these enormous trees that have been taken down. This, of course, is Dennis. So it could well be legal logging, but we suspect that a fair amount is illegal logging of the forests. All along the roads, you'll see charcoal, which has been prepared and will then be picked up and loaded onto lorries like this. So there are loads and loads of these lorries heading towards the cities like a crawl. Okay, over to Johan.
So from there, we headed north. And once again, just to give you a flavor, so in Africa, we're familiar with most of the bird families and so on, but it's great to be able to add some new species. The red-throated bee-eater, very colorful. The lighting is terrible for this one, but this is a white-throated bee-eater and a white-fronted bee-eater. Abyssinian roller is found both in East Africa and West Africa, a very attractive roller. And it's nice to come across a different buzzard, the grasshopper buzzard. I think was a lifer for everybody on the trip. And a couple of new waxbills, the orange cheek waxbill. Yet another roller, the blue-bellied roller. These 2 birds seems to have had an argument, and they were busy pouting. The vultures had got past the pouting and were arguing much more aggressively. So it was quite good then to come across a bird pair that really behaved as if they belonged together and would be affectionate. The bearded barbet, really very attractive barbet to see in Ghana. At night, we did a drive, and the number of nightjars we saw was actually quite astonishing. And we often had to stop the bus and get out and chase the nightjars off the road so that we could carry on. And this is just one of the nightjars we saw, the plain nightjar. Undoubtedly, my personal favorite starling is the chestnut-bellied starling. It's managed to get itself a really hearty meal here. Before taking off. It's got that lovely green and chestnut coloring. Very common bird in West Africa is the western plantain eater, but a really large and impressive bird. And then we went up to the border with Burkina Faso, to see once again one of the key species we were after, and that's the Egyptian plover. And I mean, there's lots of arguments about names and so on, but the one thing I can tell you is that this is not a plover. The Egyptian plover belongs in a family of its own. At one stage, I think it was grouped with coursers and pratincoles, but it's a family of its own, and a really great bird to see. And then we headed down to see the bird that we really all were after for this trip. It was down in Bonkro, and it's just south of Kumasi, which is the second biggest city in Ghana. And there's a great arrangement here with the villagers. Everybody pays a small fee, which then helps to sustain the village. And in return, they protect the birds and look after the birds. Here we are going past some cocoa being dried out, Ghana being the second largest producer in the world. And Samson, our guide, walked around all day with this bottle balanced on his head without any difficulty at all. And then we headed off the trail, get an early sighting, early place, for this incredible bird, the yellow-headed Picathartes, sometimes called the white-throated Picathartes. We waited from about 3 o'clock, I think, until about 4:30 for them to arrive. So very, very poor lighting, but once again, very well worth the wait. The closest relative to this, I think you might be interested to know, is the rock jumpers from South Africa. The Picathartes, two species, one found in around the Cameroon area, and you can see it's got this very peculiar, almost helmet around its head. And undoubtedly the top bird of the trip, and that's where we come to the end of Ghana. The villagers were very happy to see us, very interested in what was on the cameras, and very cheerful goodbye from the villagers. That, folk, brings us to the end of part 1 of our presentation.
So part 2 will be in September.
Thank you very much, Joy and Johan. That was certainly very difficult to watch given the restrictions that we have at the moment. I am fortunate only to have been to Ethiopia, and I must say, when you put up that photo of the injera, I think a lot of the viewers might have been fooled into thinking they were dish towels and all rolled up like that. And I must say that I think they taste closer to dish towels than just about anything else that I've ever eaten. I did not like injera one bit. And I ended up eating scrambled eggs instead of injera because there was the only thing else that I could get.
The national food.
But a wonderful trip down all those amazing places. And I must say the ocellated tapaculo is a bird I have always wanted to see since I started birding, and I haven't had the opportunity yet, but your experience of that bird was suitably described. It sounds like an absolutely amazing experience. So thank you very much. I know I'm not doing the thank yous. I'm just here to manage a few of the questions. I don't know if there are any questions. Give our members a second or two to send anything through if they have any. Nothing at the moment. If I can ask you this, which of those 4 destinations was your preferred? Which one did you enjoy the most? I know each one has such amazing iconic birds. I think you've listed quite a few, but where would you say is your favorite of those 4?
Well, I think, look, Ecuador really, I mean, it was like 2 different trips. The Amazon basin being one half that was quite unique, and then the other where I really enjoyed the hummingbirds. But yeah, I mean, I feel so privileged to have been to other places like that forest where hardly anyone has been before, on the west coast of Ghana. I mean, the accommodation, everything was rough, but it was really special, you know. It's very difficult to say this place is better than that place, because they're all so unique. And as I say, really, well, we've loved everywhere we've gone. And even the places like that one hotel in Libyan where we had to share the toilet, and it was all yuck. And then we all slept on top of our beds that night. But I mean, you know, those things become memorable. And you look back almost positively afterwards, because it's such a memorable thing. And because you're with a group of people and we all laughed it off. Yeah, I mean, great.
Yeah, I would echo those. The places are special. I mean, you go to Madagascar, from a bird point of view, I think we probably saw something like about 158 or 160 species, which is not a lot. But over 100 of those are endemic bird species. And then you've got the chameleons, and you've got the lemurs, and you've got all the different, the forests, etc.
The lemurs,
Ethiopia is an amazing place to visit, quite apart from the birds. Culturally, you know, incredibly diverse place. And Ghana, a real model democracy within Africa. So all very special. Ecuador, of course, something like about 2,000 bird species. So it's like having a 7-course dessert.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And it just goes to show the corners of the earth one travels in order to see birds. I think that's one of the greatest things about being a birder, is that you visit places that are places you probably never would have visited if you hadn't been interested in birds. Well, thank you very much. I'm not going to ask any more questions. I'm going to hand over to Priscilla, who I think would love to do a thank you. Priscilla, can I hand over to you?
Yes, you can. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. I'm not putting on my video. Joy and Johan, I have just loved visiting these 4 countries with you, and I'm sure that everybody who's been watching tonight has enjoyed the whole experience with you. And all I can say is, Joy, you said, oh, the men probably don't like these shots of hotels and people and things. I loved it, because to me, that goes hand in hand with the birding, is meeting the people watching and seeing how people in other worlds live, and consequently how they conserve their birds and look after them. And I also loved that in each country you hired local guides. I could equate with that awful logging that you observed in Ghana, because I saw the same thing happening in Mozambique, and those huge piles of charcoal on the sides of the road. But I suppose when you are living in an impoverished country, that's where you make your living. But I think you were so lucky not only to see all those magnificent birds, but to actually have the memory to have been able to remember all the different new names. I think that's what's so amazing about going birding in another country, is that almost every bird you see has a different name, some of which you've probably never heard before, and you have to remember them. Also very lucky to go birding with like-minded people.
Yes.
And what I really enjoyed about your tour was saying, oh, look, there's so-and-so, there's so-and-so. It was lovely to see the people who went on those tours as well. Gosh, as you went through each country, all I wanted to do was to go birding in other parts of the world. So roll on someone to take on the international portfolio of tours for the Cape Bird Club. Thank you very, very much, Johan and Joy. It's been a splendid evening, and we really do look forward to the September part 2. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Well, I think that